everyone for coming tonight. I'd like to just say something briefly before we begin the event, is simply to mention for those of you attending virtually that you do have the opportunity to submit questions as well via the website of the foundation. There is a WhatsApp number as well as an email address, and I'll be provided a tablet at the end of the session to be able to ask the questions directly to Adania about the book. And of course, those of you who are here in person can ask directly. So thanks very much for joining us. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Tasia, Vera, Eric, and the many other people who have made this gathering possible, both virtually and amazingly in person. It's a great honor to be here tonight with Adania Shibli. It's also a great honor to follow Amin Maalouf. Born in 1974 in Palestine, she's the author of 3 novels that have been recognized for their quality, and they've been recognized both close to home. She's a 2-time winner of the Katan Award for Young Writers and was listed among the Beirut 39, which was a selection of Arabic's most exciting younger writers, authors under the age of 40. But she's also obtained recognition far beyond that as well, a good example being in the past year for her most recent novel, being a finalist, listed as a finalist for the leading prizes for international literature in the United States, the National Book Award, and in the UK, the International Booker. And she's also published short fiction, writing about art, non-narrative essays, and teaches at Birzeit University. I'm really thrilled to be having this conversation because I can say candidly that Minor Details, to my mind, one of the most engaging and compelling works of fiction that I've read in the last year. I've had the great fortune to not just read it when it first appeared into English, but to have been able to teach it alongside many other interesting works of contemporary literature in translation in the autumn. And it's through the rereading of the book, that so much is often revealed about a book's strengths and weaknesses and so on. And I found myself even more fascinated, not just by the story it tells, which is something that I think drives the narrative and makes it impossible to put down until the moment that you finish it, but also in terms of the way that it was formed and structured. And so I'm delighted to have these opportunities to ask you about that and its making tonight. So maybe we can begin the discussion on the topic of this year's theme, which has to do with change. And the novel consists of 2 parts that feel very much like mirrors of one another in many respects. One is set in 1949 in the desert in the south, and the other seems to be set, it's undated, but it feels very much like the present, and there's a female protagonist who is unnamed. And can you say something about your approach to the historical, the geographical and linguistic changes between these different periods, right? Writing about 1949 on the one hand, and then you have, that's on the one, it's both a mirror formally, and yet at the same time, there's a way in which they seem to be on parallel tracks. The events that happen in the first section resonate very directly with the events in the second. Can you think? I was thinking about the historical, the way that things seem to repeat. They don't change, yeah. And at the same time, the second section is somewhere else. 2015 or 2020 is not 1949.
Yeah. First of all, hello. Hi, everybody. I don't know how to answer this question because mainly it is, to be frank, it has not much to do with the idea of history or geography as such, but within the writing process, I think. Like normally, my previous works, or I think like before I started working on Minor Detail, which was 2004. I finished it in 2016, so it took 12 years to write it. And through this process, I think the idea of time and what it means in terms of language, and even with the construction of the words and the distances or the silences within the writing itself, it's something that you don't know how to live it in terms of the language and in terms of time. Normally, like my work before really concentrated on almost the moment, the spot where time kind of unfold, but it was never this longer extension. And maybe because I was just fed up of my characters, they're not moving, and they're not moving in time or place, so I decided, okay, this time you're gonna go really far away in time and also in places. And I have to be frank, because the previous novel, We Are All Equally Far From Love, like there's this character, 40 pages, and she doesn't move out of bed. And I thought, I will not write like this anymore. My next character is gonna move, gonna travel, and all the characters gonna move even in time and place and so on. So it was a challenge as well how to kind of relate to language when your language has been the whole time constricted. And so it was almost an encounter with a new type of language, because also how language extends in the landscape. It's not only with the human beings, how we use language, but how a landscape can carry language. And for me, really, I'm like kind of now maybe a lot focusing on this, the manifestation of the linguistic within the natural, if there's such a possibility, because language is also very much human-centric. But is there kind of almost an understanding, a linguistic intimacy with things or objects or beings that they don't use language? So it was this kind of difficulty at a certain time, and I found this kind of alliance. I like this alliance because it brought the alliance of the silence that within the writing process, the silence that kind of make silence itself disappears from the writing, but also an almost kind of silent linguistic relation with everything that doesn't speak. And I think in the context of Palestine, not speaking is almost as important as speaking, I would say. So yeah, these were kind of things coming through the writing process, which was long. I hope I don't, like if we're talking about change, so I'm gonna change my writing practices. It will not be 12 years to write a novel, maybe 6 years, so we'll see.
It's extraordinary given the 12 years that it's taken. I think you've also already just answered something I was curious about as well, is the way in which the manuscript changed under your hand as you were developing it, and it requires different things and various modifications. But I'm curious about, I was thinking about one other form of change, which on the one hand seems banal if we think of change as a metaphor. On the other hand, it unites all of the events, I think, in this festival, and that has to do with translation or the movement of the text from an original into other languages. And after the 12 years of very carefully, sentence by sentence, building the architecture of this work in Arabic, it is beginning to migrate, right, into, or I don't know if that's quite the right figure for it, but it is moving into languages like German and French and so on. And I wonder what the experience of that has been like for you. I know that you're multilingual. We were talking about Korean and Hebrew and German earlier, and so that you have some understanding of things that are coming, what people are saying or how translators are trying to approach the work. I'm curious in particular because I think because of the focus seems to be, and I see this only indirectly because I'm reading you in translation, on each word. That sentences matter, but it seems like it very, if it's this word that appears in the first section and it reoccurs later, it's not an accident, right? So it must feel strange to see these other versions of the text as they circulate.
It's not only strange, it's painful, probably. I mean, it's really an issue, the question of translation, because of, I mean, luckily, I don't have to read my books. So I just work sometimes with the translators. I don't think really translators like that. I think if there's kind of a section for translators that they would like to torture a writer, it will be me, because I'm really kind of, it's not personal as much as linguistic, really, and I kind of feel it. It's something beyond the language itself. So when there's a language that I don't speak or I speak, I feel that this word doesn't want to exist this way. So it's not a kind of, it's strange actually because I am very much attached to Arabic language. I really love this language. I'm like kind of, if I'm in love with something or anything, it's the Arabic language, because it's kind of fascinating, its possibilities and its playfulness, and it's endless, like where you can go with the sounds, with how you construct a certain rhythm. Like you can say, like an object can be have so many names and words to refer to it, so you can choose, and you can actually eliminate one letter. If, for instance, you cannot say the ra, like ra, you can say the same thing without like a whole paragraph eliminating the letter. So there's like a whole kind of games within the language. So the question, how these games can live differently. Definitely there is a different type of game there, but it's too, sometimes it's in one's head, that and one's also maybe heart, the intimacy of language, how you can, like which letter you don't want to have this year or this decade. And I know, like in the last 10 years, I have been really attached a lot to the ba, na, and a. And I see them, and I try, okay, now I say in the new novel, I would like to have them less. But so this is kind of layers that maybe they don't need to be translated because it's about a certain intimacy, but maybe the translator would find a different thing. Somehow, when I read a translation, I feel it. It's not like, sometimes I actually, when I revise translation, I don't look at the original, that my text, but I want to, or the whole time, kind of feel what possibilities the new language can give, can open up the text to. Because also translations from into Arabic, they open the Arabic language to a new experience that in Arabic literature you cannot have it. It's only through translated literatures into Arabic that you can have almost a new entry to language. It's almost like you're entering a place which is very intimate, but suddenly you're having a complete new gate to it. It's like a fresh entry. And in that sense, translation is an act of generosity because you could offer this to another language. And for me, I never wanted any of my translations or when my works are translated to be correctly translated. I don't want the English to be the perfect English. I wanted to kind of have these mistakes, little mistakes, because they are full in Arabic. I mean, I intentionally put, and it's not a mistake as much as something that you kind of, you don't smoothly move with. And this kind of smoothness I have a problem with because it's almost, we should stop at everyone, but it shouldn't be also stopping, making a point, but making a fresh relation to every word. It's almost like every word saying, I am a word, can you stop please for a minute and be with me? But without making it kind of enforced. It's almost natural but beautiful that creates a certain relation. Yeah, with I should stop speaking about language because I cannot stop when I speak about language.
No, I don't want you to stop. In fact, I'm going to ask you a very twisted, I'm going to turn this question inside out because you just mentioned previously the importance of silences to you. And if you think it's difficult to translate phonemes and syllables and words, I mean, try to translate silences, right? I mean, if it clearly in the English, there is a lot that is between the lines. There's a great deal that is evoked and suggestive, and it's left in terms of the dilemma. And the main dilemma, I mean, just to describe, it's cautious because I don't want to give anything away about the book, and it's really the kind of work where you can start on page 1 without knowing anything, and it will draw you in, and everything you need to know is in the work of fiction itself. But it is powerfully suggestive in the way that great allegorical fiction can be suggestive, which is to say it never freezes, it never teaches, it feels suggestive so that a lot of the completion that takes place is in the reader's mind. And the extraordinary, I would say the great literary aspect of it is that it seems to, on the one hand, it has a universality that makes what occurs within it applicable everywhere else in the world without ever sacrificing precision, detail, and the location and the situation upon which the fiction has been constructed. But it's never directing the reader in any way. And it's just to be evocative and to be suggestive like that, to actually have these silences embedded in the text and then discovered by readers who come across it in languages other than Arabic, says something miraculous about, I don't know if it's about translation or if it has to do with composition and the way that a work can be designed. But that seems just extraordinary, right? Because I mean, how do you convert something that is between the lines in one language into another language and culture?
Yeah, I mean, this is all. Yeah, it's basically really kind of working what should be written and what should not be written. I mean, especially with this novel, it works. I mean, okay, every word has its life and its presence, and it needs to be there only if it needs to be there, because it's also, this is maybe the wish of the words, like, to have the respect and the dignity for each word there. So which words don't want to be there is also equally important. How this absence is, for me, the certain absent words, they are there around these words which are there, I think. So it's almost writing and not writing at the same time. And specifically in this, because for me, it was a question about actually language. There are 2 chapters, and you refer to it as mirroring, whereas for me, it was how a word can live 50 years ago and what a new life a word will have now. How a word can, in this life, almost be involved in the worst act we can imagine, but this exact word can be engaged in the most intimate and loving and gentle act. And this is fascinating. I mean, can we be humans like words? That we the same, it can be. Sometimes we are the most gentle and the nicest, and then like after, I don't know, when something freaks us out, we are evil and monstrous. And so it is the life of words. And luckily they are having this manifestation in the writing within the silence. So, and I think it is very interesting, this tension also, what possibilities the word will have, and being in complete silence, just writing it alone. Reading, sorry, it's written and you're reading it, and yeah.
Before we read from the text itself in the original Arabic.
And then you discover how all what I'm saying is irrelevant, not related.
It is translation. I'd like to ask a question about distance and proximity. Partly because in terms of the main narrators, there's an Israeli commander in 1949 who is the principal protagonist or figure in the first part, or its focus. There's also a young Bedouin woman who is gang raped by soldiers, but she doesn't get any language, and the camera is often focused, is on the commander himself. There's a young Palestinian woman in the second section who is trying to reconstruct the events that have been depicted in the first half. That's basically the way that the book has been organized. So there's a kind of distance written into the narrative. I remember a student of mine saying, it's like, I feel as though I'm not permitted to have empathy for these characters. I'm not allowed close, that the author in the language is keeping me back by not revealing certain details, by always standing back, that you have these different events, but that, as a reader, you're not told what to do with them. You're basically left alone with that, that there's a restraint, a narrative restraint. So some of that is a question about that, your characters in the work, whether or not it felt intentional to stand back from them, or whether this was just some other kind of effect or experience in receiving the book. The other is about writing fiction that is set both in the past but also in the present, but set in Palestine from elsewhere, if it is indeed elsewhere. I assume that you are writing a lot of the work, you spend much of the year in Berlin, although you moved back and forth before we were all pinned down to one or two locations. But writing about both the past as well as the very specific details of reality, whether or not would it have been an advantage or a disadvantage to actually be present there while writing?
Yeah, I would say, rarely I write in Palestine. I always need to be out of Palestine. Maybe because also I don't have Arabic around me. It's nice, like you're completely alone in a place that language sometimes, passes next to you, but not through you. And you're all alone with this language. And it's a different kind of experience of it. And for me, it's not a question about past and present. I'm sorry, but I keep bringing it. For me, it's a question of a past tense and the present tense. And actually, this is what part that was difficult to translate also the game with the future. There was this thing in terms of the future that could not be translated so much, and we stopped to discuss that a lot. But because it's a question of language rather than something related to the future. So it's like how we can consider a past, talking about a past. It's really kind of, if we use the verbs to describe it in the past tense, then it becomes a past. But imagine if we refer to this year, but in terms of the present, and the present, and the verbs which are in the present, is it still really in a past? And I think this is like going back to what I was saying earlier, that these certain words, they are coming, but they are used in a context of the present. So they have kind of a different life somehow. I never write about, I think, but I write with, I would say, really. It's with these kind of possibilities. Also the landscape decides kind of the rhythm, or the kind of the choice of whether it's a past tense or a present tense. It's something that decided not by an event that is related to reality, because it's not. It's maybe everything is written by reality, maybe everything is formed, but also equally it's not. It's written by language itself and how language materializes in a certain moment. For me, this book is, rather than past and present, is about being able to articulate and speak clearly and being the one who constantly needs to push their words back. Really, this is a question. It's almost like those who stutter but they are pretending to speak clearly. Can somebody who stutters, somebody who doesn't use language so well, write in a way as if, or they pretend to be articulate? And this is for me. So maybe the past is the language of the articulate, of the narrative, of the grand narrative, even the choice of the structure. It is kind of clear, moving in a certain way. Whereas the present, it's almost, you're almost stumbling over language. You don't know which is the next word you're gonna have. And it kind of highlights this, or it is a lived experience of the inability to see the words. You don't have this reflective moment to think about the words, but they're appearing here and disappearing, and you're mumbling and stuttering, and there's a whole chaotic thing. And this is, for me, the present when it comes also to language. Yeah.
Great. Maybe we can begin from the reading. Let me just situate the scene. This is at the beginning of the second half of the book, so we're in the present, and this features that unnamed protagonist I mentioned earlier. She has come across an article in a newspaper about this historical case of the gang rape and murder of this young Bedouin girl, and then some others who are killed alongside her at the time. And given the coincidence that this narrator was born 25 years after that date, it begins to obsess her. And she sets off on a quest, or she decides that she needs to revisit the scene of this crime. Only there are some practical challenges to that realization, and I think she begins to process these during this passage.
Which are related to letters.
Exactly.
So this is from the second part of chapter. Yeah. موقع الحادثة والمتاحف والأرشيفات التي توثقها جميعها تقع بحسب تقسيم الجيش للبلاد في أماكن هي خارج نطاق منطقة جيم، وأبعد منها بكثير، ليس بعيداً عن الحدود مع مصر، بينما أطول رحلة يمكنني الإتيان عليها ببطاقة الخضراء التي تعلن بأنني من منطقة ألف هي من بيتي إلى عملي الجديد. مع أنه قانونياً يمكن لأي فرد من منطقة ألف الذهاب إلى منطقة ب، إن لم يكن هنالك أسباب سياسية وعسكرية استثنائية تحول دون ذلك.
The site of the incident, I should mention, this is from the English translation by Elizabeth Jacquet. The site of the incident and the museums and archives documenting it are located outside Area C, according to the military's division of the country. And not only that, but they're quite far away, close to the border with Egypt, while the longest trip I can embark on with my green identity card, which shows I'm from Area A, is from my house to my new job. Legally, though, anyone from Area A can go to Area B if there aren't exceptional political or military circumstances that prevent one from doing so. But nowadays, such exceptional circumstances are in fact the norm, and many people from Area A don't even consider going to Area B. In recent years, I haven't even gone as far as Kalandia checkpoint, which separates Area A and Area B, so how can I even think of going to a place so far that it's almost in Area D? Even the people from Area B cannot do that, and probably also those from Area C, including people from Jerusalem, whose very existence constitutes a security threat if they utter a word of Arabic outside their areas. They're permitted, of course, to be in Area A, as are residents of Area B, who frequently visit it and sometimes move there despite the fact that it's tantamount to prison now. At my new job, for instance, in addition to people like me from Area A, many of my colleagues are from other areas, all very nice people. One day at work, I confide in a colleague from Area C, from Jerusalem, that I need to go to her area, or perhaps a bit further, to take care of a personal matter. After all, it's not unusual for people from Area A to need to go to Area C for personal matters, and for people from Area C to need to go to Area A for personal matters. On hearing that, my colleague offers to lend me her blue identity card, since we're all brothers and sisters in the end, and we look similar too, at least in the eyes of the soldiers at the checkpoint. Besides, they don't closely inspect women in the first place, so they'll never notice the difference between me and the photo on her identity card. They hardly look at the people standing at the checkpoint anyway, given their contempt, and what's more, people typically look different from the photos on their identity cards, which could have been taken when they just turned 16. Honestly, yes, I can easily use her identity card. And what do I need to do and return it when we arrive at work at the beginning of next week? No rush at all. And she'll spend the weekend in Ramallah with friends. Of course, if I'm discovered, I'll say that I stole the identity card from her bag so as not to implicate her. At any rate, I have to be cautious, and I'll certainly make every effort not to be reckless. So on the afternoon of the last day of the working week, I stop by her office, borrow her identity card, and head to a car rental company to rent a car with a yellow number plate, without which one cannot travel to areas beyond Area C. But as I'm about to sign the agreement, it becomes clear that I need a credit card, which I don't have. And because I don't want to further burden that colleague, I call another colleague from my new job and ask for his help. He comes to the rental office right away and rents a car for me using his credit card, after listing me on the agreement as an additional driver, as the company employee advises us, and then I get the key. Really, my colleagues are so nice. And now I don't see any reason that would prevent me from embarking on my mission to discover the complete truth about the incident, except that as soon as I sit down behind the steering wheel of the little white car I've just rented and turn the key to start the engine, what appears to be a spider begins spinning its threads around me, tightening them into something like a barrier, impenetrable if only because they're so fragile. It's the barrier of fear, fashioned from the fear of the barrier, the checkpoint. And I wish I could find out whether the interpreters are done because they've been reading from the French translation. It's okay. Okay, good. So I'm curious about the influence of other genres on your writing of minor detail, partly because you've, as I've mentioned in the introduction, you don't just write fiction, you do other forms of fiction, including, well, let's begin with some of the creative forms of poetry. Despite its very pared back approach in the language, there are lyrical and sensual moments in it, and especially I'm thinking about the first novel of yours to appear in English, which also had these moments of lyricism. And for example, nonfiction, or even journalism for that matter. Do you feel that you're working within a tradition of reading novelists and working within the fiction, or are there other forms that contribute, as it were, to the making of a novel like this?
It's a quiet, of course, I mean, we're all, or not we're all, like when there's literature, one is kind of being informed and formed by other literary works and other uses of language by people, how they speak, certain sensibilities, I would say, and even certain kind of almost repetitions of certain experiences that it becomes, like some reference as if it's like autistic, but it's almost clinging to how do you say, to maybe an image. I would say like maybe I write, there is kind of something visual, but it's also related to language. And the movement of that. It's almost, I cannot make the relation between words and images, and because I'm kind of a cinephile as well. I love cinema. And I know it creates a certain relation. And I always also wonder how this relation can be informing literature, which is completely not visual. Like not in terms of representation. It is kind of the words on their own. So there is this game, there is this tension, and actually there is in the novel also maybe the characters. I know like sometimes, for instance, there is trying to connect the novel or the character to a commander that there's an article written about this incident. But in fact, this character is really, I would say now, it's a kind of derived from one of the paintings of Beckmann. So this is like, even like certain scenes in the book, they are derived from certain paintings. And there is a kind of presence for expressionist painting. So it's very interesting, like how sometimes these influences, how certain sections are being written by completely, sometimes unexpected interests, but they force themselves. It's how this kind of, if I look at this, it's a self-portrait of Beckmann. And this, I mean, when I visited the museum, it was in the Ludwig Museum in Cologne. There was a show about Beckmann. And I saw this kind of, portrait by Beckmann. And it was like, wow, this is such a force that it is a literary force. Though it is like just one kind of, it's a painting. So if this kind of character suddenly comes and lives in words, how it can live. So there are these references. Also, there's another one by another painter for one of the scenes from also the Brucker group, that that painting actually wrote that scene. It's but these are encounters. Sometimes it's a painting, sometimes it's a sound, sometimes it's a joke. There's often there are certain jokes there. There's sometimes also stories of painters in the novel here on their experiences. Yeah.
Fascinating forms of translation, which are sometimes non-linguistic,
Yes.
that they're visual.
Yeah.
It's curious too, because I'd wondered also, you've worked in theater, no? Or at least in particular in Germany, and that was another one of those disciplines where
Yeah.
I was curious as to the way that it may manifest,
Yeah, theater. I mean, I think if I just could do theater, I wouldn't write anything. I really have this passion for theater. It's very interesting because it's completely different than writing. Writing is lonely and you can go back and edit. But I think what's fascinating in the space of theater, like this space we are sharing here now, it is a space that it's so it's so close and so difficult in a way, and how you can, what separates us and what can be brought on here, though we are in the same room and we are so kind of conscious, even with Brecht, whatever he does, and this kind of moments to break the theater, still there is this kind of intimacy that builds, that it is the pure relation to art somehow. It is almost like the living of art. The painting you do, the book you do, so you can travel with it. But the immediacy of theater is very difficult, I think. It's one that will portray any moment where you cheat. And I'm really interested in when we cheat in a book, when we cheat in a painting, when we cheat in a film. And sometimes I try to cheat in the book because, it takes a long time and the words are not coming. And so you try to cheat and you say, okay, I just make a shortcut. I just do that. And the book says no. But in theater, so you really need to rely on yourself as the examiner of the moment of cheating. Whereas in theater, it's a collaborative work. It's almost we are here all kind of trying together and to hold that between each other. It's the social life of art, maybe.
Now, this novel has an autonomous life of its own. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think you need to know the entire history of the region to immerse in it and to feel that you have immersed in it through the novel.
You need to know the history of painting, maybe. That's
or Brecht. I was thinking about documentation because here's the thing: the novel it has an authenticity and authority that which is that of a work of fiction. Which is to say, you believe it within the context of the fiction, everything that has been arranged, the way that it's been presented. And yet at the same time, as a curious reader who sometimes interrupts the pleasure of reading, I couldn't help but be curious, like, is some of this material documentary, right? We have language, this phrase, man, not the tank, shall prevail. There's a speech that's delivered by a commander, a rhetorical speech, right? And it feels very much aligned with, in tune with what could have been said at that moment. I was curious, again, sort of like the behind the scenes, the making of, in terms of process. Like, were these created, or was it a mix of, did you actually do research and incorporate some documentation into those scenes?
I mean, for me, it's about sentences that exist. And then you deal with them. Like whatever words we have, sentences that they come in the writing. So why not? If it's like is said by a commander, if it works and it can work and it can transform itself. Because for me, with this sentence specifically, I was interested in its transformation, through time. What if you say something, man but not the tank shall prevail? You say it by a certain person at this time, and then this same sentence is repeated by the same person, but after a long time. So for me, it was really, I was interested in this shift. I'm not interested in the sentence itself, but how this sentence can live. And with other, like the commander speech, also it's also sort of a joke, because it's also the language you grow up with. In the context of Palestine, you're growing up with a Zionist language that kind of eliminates you, shows you like you're primitive, you almost didn't exist, you kind of, you're a second inferior creature. So I was interested in this language that kind of portrays and creates this possibility of one human being seeing another human being in a certain way. And this is the language that I say I love, So I'm trying to see, okay, my love, my language, how it can almost commit a possibility of dehumanization. So for me, I was really fascinated. I was reading like a lot of Ben Gurion speeches and other military personnel. And I was like, okay, let me imagine a moment that I can speak like them and how I would speak. And it's very strange because you said earlier there's no empathy. I really had great empathy to my characters. So I mean, I love them. Even if they commit a crime, I am with them. It's a strange love, It's not a good love. It might be bad love, but, does anybody know of a good love?
Well, I think there's a relation, perhaps, maybe this is the only time in the past year that you've been compared to Henry James, but he said at one point, that it's the relation of, it's almost like he's sleeping on the battlefield with his characters, but he's not going to touch them. They're there and they're separate, right?
Yeah.
They have their own autonomous life within that context.
Yeah, I don't want them to be alive. I want them only to remain in the book. Yeah. This is their place. Of course, it's not like a moment that I want them to be these characters. And this is also what a great thing about literature, that it allows this, whoever possibilities of these characters to be without them having to be alive. So and I was delving, and I was actually, it's not kind of amused, but interested in this kind of language. How a language can easily, logically, rationally, smoothly dehumanize somebody. Naturally. So it ends up a natural thing without you feeling it's really bad. It's okay to be a criminal. And for me, it's not interesting when we present the criminal like, oh, so criminal, and what he said. This is easy, but it's like really to see when the act of a crime can almost go invisibly, naturally to a certain, without us finding the right moment when to say stop. This is going a bit. And it's interesting because this is almost like and which part you would say? This is
I wonder if that's related also to the place of animals and other creatures in the work who seem to have, terrific resonance, but it's an open meaning that's there. They're always there is everything from especially the dogs in the first, second, and the second section. But I'm going to speed up and go to the last question so that we'll have time for the Q&As. Since we're in Switzerland, and I recall at an earlier event that you mentioned that you had just read in Arabic Robert Walser, Der Spaziergang, I think. I wanted to at least maybe conclude with a question about the importance of international literature to you as a reader and a writer, specific authors and approaches and works that opened up new perspectives to you of the way that you could use Arabic or things that you could do in writing that came from elsewhere, that were imports, as it were.
Walser is really fascinating in how, and for me, actually, there are some writers one reads and then we get influenced by them. We almost take unconsciously we take their words and relation to language. But I think with Walser, he's one of the writers, the only writer that I read, and he can touch you, but without forcing you to adapt his language. And this is fascinating. This is completely, like you read him, it's your words, but you never want to take these words because you don't feel that you need to own them or to own his style. And I think he's like a true magician. What he can do with just a small word, like you read a whole 2 pages, but there's this kind of one word, suddenly one word is inserted, and it shifts, it almost brings you on the edge of yourself. And this is the power. It's like you don't need to read so much, just one word comes almost stealthily, like a hole in a dress that we didn't plan this hole, but suddenly you notice it, and suddenly it kind of defines your dress, what you're gonna do with your dress. You're gonna mend it, you're gonna throw it, you're gonna, how did this, and it's like so fascinating what he does. Actually, with Walser, I mean, of course, I would like every literature to be translated into Arabic to open up or to allow a new relation to Arabic. But with Walser, he's maybe the only writer that I would like to learn German, to read him in German. I mean, the translation in Arabic is fascinating, and I'm trying to bribe some translator friends to translate more works, and we're discussing things. And really, like, you know, there's other writers like Borchardt. I love him. He didn't live for long, but it's you know, Borchardt, he brings something so beautiful when he's translated into Arabic. But Walser, I think if some text cannot be translated, it is him. It is this kind of words that suddenly we feel, okay, they are the dangerous words. I don't know, everybody, I mean, like, sometimes I walk in the streets in Berlin, it's like, wow, you're all lucky you can read Walser, and I cannot. Yeah.
And yet it's so extraordinary that you can be a translation can be the way in, even for an author like Walser, who's so deeply enmeshed in the possibilities of what German syntax and neologisms and compound words can, which he appropriates idiosyncratically, right? But within the possibilities of German, it's the sort of thing that if you discover it in German, you think this can't be done outside of German until you have conversations with people who have read it in Spanish and Japanese and love different aspects of the novel or the stories or the writing of the style that actually sync with some aspect that you've appreciated in the original as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and reading him in Arabic, you feel that. You feel like what I described earlier, this moment that you cannot catch, and suddenly you find yourself slipping in really a deep hole of complete irrationality. And where did this happen? Which paragraph? Which sentence? You cannot articulate. But then I am almost like, suddenly I think, but maybe there's something missed. I don't want to miss anything of him, you know? Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So we have time for some questions. first, is there anybody in the audience directly who would like to begin?
Thank you so much. I'm very curious to know if the book was published in Israel, and if so, was it met with pushback, criticism, or even hostility, since the sensitive subject it evokes?
Yeah, okay. This will be a long story, but we'll dive into it. So there's an Israeli publisher that contacted me a few years ago to publish something. I said, actually, I would like, if something translated into Hebrew, to be this book. And I had other translations into Hebrew. Of course, I don't publish my text in magazines that's sponsored by the Israeli government. This is like a no-go. This is, and there are like some magazines which are by, like Mitam, it's by poetess Haklaor, who's really, he's also even, the Israeli government, you would not see him in festivals because they don't support a poet like him who's critical. But many people come around him and they work with him and try to support many Israeli poets like Aharon Shabtai as well, who's great. And I'm afraid he passed away a while ago. Anyway, so then this publisher emailed, and I said, okay, we can check that. So when the novel was over, it was published in Arabic, as I promised, I sent them the manuscript. And that's the most interesting. I mean, I saw Beckett down here. So it's almost like a play by Beckett, the conversation that with Oboz, and or even UNESCO, a play of UNESCO. So it goes like, yeah, thank you so much. We're looking forward to read it. Yeah, we're still reading it. We're reading it, but we don't know. We are not sure, but we will read it again. We have met and discussed it, but we will still think about it. And eventually, we are very sorry. I said, okay, fine. For me, it's almost like a guest, and you don't force anything. Things, it's literature. It should be loved. It should be welcome. But then, so my book just got published, and there was this moment of realization. My book was not allowed to go to enter Palestine. Actually, not because of my book, but the Israeli authorities don't allow books to enter Palestine. They have the control, and it's part of the kind of policy of really kind of cultural degradation, let's say. I remember, but somehow I forgot that. I forgot this. And of course, sometimes there's so many details for living under occupation, colonization, it gets everywhere, but there's so many details you forget. You forget what it means until it touches you. And this is a fascinating thing about the occupation, that it is designed personally. It will touch you, but you kind of almost separate from the others. And then they wanted to do a book launch, like my friends in the cultural institutions, like, yeah, finally you got it. We got fed up of your novel that you worked on 12 years, because everybody asked me, when is your novel? It's like, yeah, still like another edition, like another draft. So they were happy, just like, okay, we need to see it. And we couldn't have the book. The book is not there. Somebody suggested to smuggle some copies, and we said, how many? He said, like, yeah, I can bring 6 copies. I mean, 6 copies. We'll have an event with I don't know how many people. And then I decided to plagiarize my book. I hope my publisher never hears this. So I went, so I teach at the university. And so another professor told me, yeah, one of my students, he has this photocopy shop, and he really can plagiarize books. So I went to him, and I didn't say like I'm writer of the book. I said, can you make copies of this book? And he looked at it, yeah, I can. I said, can you do 100 copies. He said, yeah. I said, when will it be ready? He said, come tomorrow. I said, okay. And I go, to my friends, like, we're gonna steal my book. I say, yeah, okay, but what do we do? Because also, we have it and people want to buy it, so what do we do with the money? Because, I'm stealing my own book, and what we do with the money? And so it's like a dilemma. Yeah, okay, so we decide we donate all of the money from the book to, there's one group of young people in Ashata refugee camp that they created a library. So we donated 2/3 of the money of the book to them, and another third to another reading group in Nablus. So we said, okay, I committed a crime, but at least, the fruits of this crime are beneficial. So if my publisher ever say, but I didn't take the money is in good hands, and it's, so, what I say that I became a liar to my publisher, I became a thief, and plagiarizing my own book. So you see, like, for an Israeli reader, for a Hebrew reader, he will just get it, like, legally, because I agreed to give the rights for reading. And I said, no. After this process, I said, actually, if I agree that the book is published in Hebrew, I'm participating in a discriminatory, racist, degradatory process where I am allowing Israeli or Hebrew readers to read the book, whereas the Palestinian readers, the Arabic readers, cannot read it. And each time they need to rely on a thief like me to bring them some copies, because I didn't do that. I mean, I wish now they all plagiarizing it, but they kind of out of respect, they don't do it. And until now, any copies, they are being smuggled. I went to a bookshop in Bethlehem, and the owner said, oh, yeah, we got your copies of your book. Like, we have 6 copies, and we put them in. And people go and describe where they put them in the suitcase, like, under the clothes, in the shampoo, and so on. And it's almost an act of rebellion that you're committing. So it is within these questions you start to think. So definitely, I don't care, but I don't want. When it's possible to allow books, and when Palestinian readers and Arabic readers can read it in Palestine, yeah, then this is a sense of equality, but not to go into this kind of dynamics of inequality and yeah, then, like, it's a horror actually to imagine, like, one can read and discuss it and, okay, say it's like, okay, yeah, this is like a bias or whatever you say, but the other cannot. Oh.
Well, there's one question that was sent in, and I am also a writer, and this book has so much to admire stylistically. I particularly admired how you constructed the evolution of the Israeli general in the first part. His ablutions serve as a marker against which the reader can measure his development as a character, almost like a metronome. What were the challenges of writing this particular character?
There was a huge challenge, actually.
If you know the character, then yes.
Yeah. Because actually the perspective was different. When I work, I always have these 5 really loyal readers that they read my work. I always give them. It's also kind of almost to push your text away to different eyes and different relations, and also to break your kind of relation to it. And the condition of these readers, they should be cruel as possible. And one of them actually, so the character was a bit different. So it was almost all from a different perspective. One of these readers said, I don't want to be close to this character. Don't do it to me. It's violence for me. You're practicing violence. And he's like, what? So what can I do now? I say, I tell you my opinion. So I go and I say, okay, what can I do? And it's almost like moving this whole character 1 centimeter away from where it was before. Really, it's just like it was here and you need to shift it. And so this what also caused the delay. And I kind of understood the feeling because it's also brought a different element to the character. And it's really kind of, I'm so grateful to these readers because they are so much, almost they are co-writers, like any other thing in co-writing. Because also, with the end, because the end was completely different, they kept, one of the readers said like, no, the end. They just like say, you send them a book and they say, I don't like it. Like, what do you don't like it? Please, can you say something else? Like, no, I don't like it. Okay, so they don't like it. So you go and you say, they don't like it. So what they don't like. And then this is what I mean about cheating. Because they will feel when you try to cheat, you make it quicker, you make it a bit what, you're tired. I mean, to write a novel for 12 years, it's like almost, kind of somebody trying to build a house without having the material. That's why it takes you 12 years. Or like the Berlin trying to build the airport,
Oh gosh, well, that's more than 12 years, isn't it?
Yes. So these are the challenges when there's a different relation to the text that it kind of pushes you back. And it's not something that because it's not something planned. I don't plan the character. It just emerges. It lives. It's almost like I said it before. Writing is like moving in this foggy landscape. Every day, I don't know what will happen. Every day, it happens as the writing happens, and reveals itself. And any attempts to make a shortcut is impossible. And now I understand it really needed these 12 years. It needed all these kind of little movement and shifts and understanding what the characters want, basically, and how they want to be in this book, and how they want to be together, how they want to be in language with words.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think there are probably other questions, but I see that we are over time. And so I want to implore those of you who are here to visit the bookshop upstairs, where translations of Minor Detail into French and English are available. And those of you who are watching online, to order it from your favorite independent bookshop nearby, in which it's maybe available, depending on where you are, in even more than those two languages.
My plagiarizing bookshop, it's in Ramallah.
Thank you very much, Adenia, for joining us. Thank you, everybody here and elsewhere, for joining us as well. And good evening to everyone.
Yeah, thank you.